So my name is Kelly. I'm the Director of Patient Activation and Program Execution in Epilepsy at Praxis. I also have a child with a DEE. I have a son, Connor, with an SCN2A mutation. And when he was diagnosed about 10 years ago, there really wasn't much known about SCN2A mutations or DEEs in general. And I started working in industry to try to desperately work on treatments to improve his quality of life. And I've been at Praxis now for about 7 years. There are several of us that work at Praxis that have children with a DEE. So we're constantly able to bring that patient voice into the workplace on a daily basis. And our CEO at Praxis is about speed. How can we develop drugs faster without compromising quality? Because for patients like this, every single day matters. So that is really the mission of Praxis and what we represent. And we are an epilepsy company. So this is our pipeline, and we have 8 different epilepsy programs. We have 2 different platforms. The first is Cerebrum, and this is our small molecule platform. And we have a drug, Relutrigine, and this is the drug that we're going to be talking about today. We also have an antisense oligonucleotide platform. This is Solidus. And these are gene-specific ASO treatments. And in talking about Relutrigine, I know for me, I have trialed so many different anti-seizure medications with my son over the years. And I really didn't have a lot of hope that the next one we tried would be much different. So I want to make it very, very clear that Relutrigine is a different type of molecule. It's in the class of sodium channel blockers, but it is a sodium channel modulator. And what that means is it's not just blocking sodium channels all the time, like what is currently available with regard to sodium channel blockers. It's a selective medication, which means it's selective to those hyperactive neurons. So it acts only when a neuron is hyperactive, and it leaves the neurons alone when they're behaving normally. When you're blocking sodium channels all of the time, that's when you can get a lot of different side effects that our kids can experience, like oversedation or sleepiness or dizziness. Relutrigine, based on its mechanism of action, is not acting the same. And there's no titration involved. So many anti-seizure medications out there, you have to slowly titrate up over a period of weeks or months to even get to a dose that's therapeutic, to then assess if it will be efficacious for your child. With Relutrigine, the dose that you start at is the dose that you stay at. So you'll be able to tell very quickly if this drug is efficacious. The half-life is very long. We're talking about a 5-day half-life, which means it only has to be administered once per day. And the half-life is so long that even if a caregiver accidentally misses giving Relutrigine that day, it won't even affect the levels, which is great. For this trial, it's a liquid formulation, so it can be administered orally or if the patient has a G or J tube. And patients can be on the ketogenic diet, and Relutrigine can accompany that. There's no added sugars, so it's keto diet friendly. And then just want to touch on the different phases of drug development, and specifically with Relutrigine. So we started in a phase 1 study. And this is for healthy volunteers, so people that do not have the disease indication that we're going into, but just so we can learn as much as possible about the compound. And Relutrigine was trialed in a phase 1 study of about 130 volunteers. And based on that data, we were able to move into what's called a phase 2 study, and this is in the patient population. The first trial that we brought to a phase 2 study was called the EMBOLD study. It was a small cohort of SCN2A and SCN8A patients. In that trial, we saw phenomenal efficacy, and so we expanded the cohort, and now we have an open enrollment for a phase 2/3 study in EMBOLD. And we also opened a phase 3 study for EMERALD, and that's the trial that's relevant to the CACNA1A population and what we're going to be talking about today. I also want to make it very clear that our EMERALD trial is the last trial in phase 3 before we try to go to an approval. And so any family that is really interested in trialing relutrigine, this EMERALD trial would be the last opportunity to do that, because there is about a few-year gap for when the trial will read out to where it could be potentially an approved medication. That takes a few years to get it approved to where a physician would be able to write a prescription for that. And I want to touch on the data from the EMBOLD study. So this was a study that had a 16-week double-blind period, and then we moved into an open label extension. And if you look at the top numbers, this is the different months where the data cuts were taken. And in month 4, the end of the double-blind portion, when we did the first data readout, we saw a median 46% reduction in seizures. For SCN2A and 8A patients, typically the seizure burden tends to be really high, and patients were able to stay on their anti-seizure medication regimen and then add relutrigine. So they were already taking what they could find for the best possible seizure control, and then they added relutrigine on top of that. So when we saw 46% median seizure reduction, we were very excited. And then when we did the most recent data cut, so looking at the 11th month mark, all patients being an open label extension, which means every patient was on relutrigine, we were seeing a 90% median seizure reduction. So this is phenomenal, and it's very different, the graph, than what we can tend to see in a lot of anti-seizure medications that our kids have been on, where we see what's referred to as a honeymoon period, where initially there's some efficacy seen in the first few months, and then for whatever reason, seizures increase, the medication's not working like it was in the beginning, and no one really understands why. With relutrigine, the longer patients are on this medication, the better their seizure control becomes. And there were no severe adverse events due to drug, and no one required a dose reduction of relutrigine during the trial. And then in addition to the primary endpoint of a reduction in seizures, we also utilized a scale called the CGI to investigate what was happening with some additional symptoms. So we pulled out a few domains in the CGI, and this exact scale we're utilizing in EMERALD as well. So we looked at disruptive behavior, and this is whatever the disruptive behavior is unique to that child at baseline. So whether it's agitation or irritability or self-harm. We looked at communication. And again, this is the child verbal at baseline? Do they communicate with noises, an assisted device, or is there no communication at all? We looked at seizure severity and intensity. So how often is rescue medication being administered? Are the seizures clustering? How long are they lasting? And then we looked at alertness, and this is around awareness, or how present is the child with caregivers or those around them. And on the day of screening, so at the beginning of the study, the clinician does an assessment on the patient with this scale, as well as the caregiver. And then this was assessed 4 months after the patients had been on drug or placebo. And as you can see, there were significant improvements in all of these domains. So we're considering relutrigine a disease-modifying therapy. So it's affecting more than just seizures. And in thinking about relutrigine, so regardless of what is causing the seizure, whether it's a syndrome diagnosis or a specific gene mutation, sodium channels play a role in the formation of seizures. And this is where relutrigine acts. So those neurons that are firing too fast or too often, that's when relutrigine steps in and attempts to bring the neurons back to a normal state. And the expectation is then a seizure will not form. So we're bringing this specific molecule now to a broader set of DEEs to assess efficacy. And we utilized relutrigine in a pretty large library of animal models. So we trialed this in both SCN2A and SCN8A mouse models. And then I want to call out specifically SCN1A. So this is a gene where sodium channel blockers are typically contraindicated. It can worsen the seizure frequency. But with relutrigine, it actually decreased seizures in both the mouse model and a fish model that we trialed it in. So it just further highlights the unique mechanism of action of relutrigine and differentiates it from your traditional sodium channel blocker. And then it was tested in some other gene mutation models as well. And we saw efficacy across the board. And then I want to talk through the EMERALD trial design, but I just want to first explain that families for this trial have options. And one of those options came out of the EMBOLD trial for the SCN2A and 8A patient. So there were a lot of families that wanted to participate, but like a traditional clinical trial where you have to travel to a study site for all of the visits, it was too burdensome for families. And it just wasn't possible for them to screen or enroll in the study with all of the travel and all of the study visits. So we really put our heads together at Praxis on the EMBOLD study and tried to figure out, how do we take out travel altogether? How can we bring the clinical trial to the family's home? And we were able to offer that option for the EMBOLD families, and we're carrying that through to EMERALD. So there's 3 choices for any family that wants to screen, and then if eligible, enroll into EMERALD. You can travel to the study site like a traditional clinical trial, or you can have every single study visit done at your home. And I want to explain what that looks like with regard to this study design. So on the day of screening, what that means is the principal investigator or the doctor in charge would join that visit by telehealth. A physician that's licensed in the patient's home state would travel to the family's home. And then a nurse that's licensed in the family's home state would also travel to the family's home. All of the assessments and exams are done in the home. All of the lab work is done in the home. And then for all of the study visits, the medication is shipped to the home. Families literally do not need to leave their home for any aspect of the trial. And then the third option is what we're calling a hybrid option, which is a mix of, if some of the visits you want to be seen at the site and some visits you want to be seen at home, families can opt in for that option too. So for EMERALD, a patient that's interested would screen, the team would come to your home, or you'd be seen at a study site. And then for about 28 days, the caregiver is just filling in a daily seizure diary. If all of the labs are normal and the patient has a minimum of 4 seizures in that screening period, then it's called they're randomized into the double-blind treatment period, which means half the patients will be on placebo and half the patients will be on relutrigine. And there's a study visit once a month for 16 weeks or 4 months. After the double-blind treatment period, then we move into what's called the open label extension. And that just means that there is no more placebo period. Every single patient in the open label extension is on active relutrigine. And there's a study visit every month during that period as well. Any family that is seeing benefit at the end of the open label extension will have the ability to remain on drug. So I don't want anyone to think that at the end of those 32 weeks, your child's seeing benefit and you have to stop it. That's not the case. We have an expanded access program built in. Any family that wants to remain on relutrigine will have that option. And then with regard to who can participate, so it's not a specific gene mutation or a specific syndrome diagnosis. Each patient would just have to have a DEE. And what that means is seizures accompanied by some aspect of developmental delay or developmental regression. And then with regard to ages, it's a pediatric through adult trial. So have to be 2 years old through 65 at the time of screening. And seizure onset, so first seizure has to happen by age 12. And then 4 seizures in that screening period. So basically a minimum of 4 seizures per month. And patients can stay on their anti-seizure medication regimen. There's no cap on the number of medications the patient can be on, but only 2 of those medications can be true sodium channel blockers. And then we make it really easy for families that are interested. So if any family wants more information, or wants to be transferred to a study site, you can go on resilientstudies.com. There's a page about the Emerald trial. You would answer a couple questions about your child, about seizure frequency, what medications are they taking, and then you would have the ability to schedule a call with a nurse navigator. And this is an RN that's going to take you through a few additional questions to make sure that your child is eligible, answer any questions you have about the study, and then if you want to proceed forward, the nurse would transfer all of your information over to one of our study sites. And then the study team, the principal investigator, the doctor in charge, and the study coordinator will contact you by email and phone to schedule a time to walk you through the informed consent form and really answer any questions that the family has. Just because you go through this website and pre-screen for the study and are transferred to a study site, you are not saying that, yes, you want to enroll. You're just saying you're interested in learning more and to see if this is a right fit for your child and for your family. So I would urge anyone that wants more information or wants to talk to the principal investigator or the study coordinator to take the next step and get that information by going through resilientstudies.com. And then that was it with slides. I see a lot of questions coming through the chat. The second half of the meeting, what we really want to do is open it up for questions and answers. So anything that's on your mind, anything that I presented that was not clear, any question that you have, maybe about your specific child, please speak up and feel free to ask anything, and we can get that answered in real time. So I will ask that we stop recording now for the questions and answers.